Me at the company party as the Leech Maid. Little did she know that I've been the majority shareholder since my late husband's first investment. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. I never thought I'd hear those words from my own daughter-in-law's mouth. Not in a million years. "Oh, this is Evelyn Ethan's mother," Amanda said with that artificial laugh of hers. "Our little leech." The conversation at the corporate party froze for a second. I stood there, clutching my modest handbag, wearing the navy blue dress I'd saved for special occasions. The executives from the company where my son had worked for 9 years exchanged uncomfortable glances. "She's always hanging around our house," Amanda continued, her voice dripping with contempt. "Can't seem to manage on her own since Ethan's father passed away." I felt my cheeks burn with humiliation. 6 years since Thomas died, and this was how they saw me. A burden, a parasite. The worst part wasn't the stranger's pitying looks. It was Ethan standing there saying nothing, a weak smile frozen on his face. "I should find the ladies' room," I murmured, desperate to escape. As I walked away, Amanda's tinkling laughter followed me. "She's always been this sensitive. We practically have to babysit her these days." The bathroom was mercifully empty. I gripped the marble countertop, staring at my reflection. A woman with graying hair and tired eyes. A woman they knew nothing about. If they only knew the truth. If Amanda only knew that the company whose anniversary they were celebrating, Henderson Technologies, belonged more to me than anyone else in that room. I was the majority shareholder. I owned 55% of the company that paid for Amanda's designer dresses and Ethan's luxury car. The company Thomas and I had built from nothing, working nights while raising Ethan, mortgaging our tiny home for the initial investment. But I had promised Thomas. On his deathbed, he had made me swear. "Don't tell Ethan," he'd whispered, his voice already fading. "Let him make his own way. Let him earn his position without living in our shadow." I had kept that promise for 6 years. I'd attended board meetings quietly through a proxy. I'd watched from a distance as the company grew, as my son climbed the corporate ladder on his own merit. I'd lived simply in my small home, never touching the millions that were rightfully mine, and I had welcomed Amanda into our family, despite her obvious disdain for my modest lifestyle. I splashed cold water on my face and straightened my shoulders. When I returned to the party, Amanda was holding court with the executive team, Ethan at her side. Her red dress probably cost more than I spent on clothes in a year. But I didn't care about material things. Never had. "There she is," Amanda called out as if we were the best of friends. "Evelyn, come tell everyone about your bridge club. So adorable how you keep busy." I smiled politely. "It keeps my mind sharp." What Amanda didn't know was that my bridge club was actually a monthly meeting with my financial advisor, reviewing the performance of Henderson Technologies and my other investments. Later that evening, as we were leaving, I overheard Amanda whispering to Ethan, "We need to talk about your mother. She can't keep coming to these events. She's embarrassing Ethan. People are going to think you come from, you know." "She's my mother, Amanda," Ethan said, but his voice lacked conviction. "And she's holding you back." Hughes was watching when she spilled her drink. "You're up for that promotion, Ethan. We can't afford these mistakes." My heart broke a little as my son sighed. "I'll talk to her. Maybe it's time to consider that retirement community we looked at." They didn't see me standing there, didn't notice me slipping away to call a taxi instead of riding with them. On the drive home, watching the city lights blur through my tears, I made a decision. For 6 years, I had honored Thomas's wishes. I had stayed in the shadows, letting our son find his way. But Thomas never could have imagined Amanda. Never could have foreseen how she would poison Ethan against me. How she would make him ashamed of his own roots. Tomorrow, I would call Peter Lawson, the family attorney who managed my shares. It was time to rethink my approach, not out of vengeance, but out of love for my son, for Thomas's legacy, and for my own dignity. As I paid the taxi driver and walked up the path to my modest home, the same home where we'd raised Ethan, where Thomas and I had dreamed of our future, I felt a strange calm settling over me. Amanda had no idea who she was dealing with. The leech was about to show her teeth. The morning after the corporate party, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea gone cold, staring at a photograph. Thomas and I on the day we opened the first Henderson Technologies office, a converted storage room with 2 desks and a dream. I was 27, Thomas 31. Both of us exhausted but beaming with pride. "We did it," he had whispered in my ear that day. "This is just the beginning, Evelyn. Who would have thought that tiny operation would grow into the multi-million-dollar company it was today? A company my own son worked for, never knowing his parents had built it from nothing." The doorbell rang, pulling me from my thoughts. Peter Lawson stood on my porch, his leather briefcase in hand. At 72, he was still sharp as a tack. The only person besides me who knew the full truth about my ownership of Henderson Technologies. "You sounded upset on the phone," he said as I led him to the living room. I poured out everything. Amanda's cruel words, Ethan's silence, their plans to ship me off to a retirement community. Peter listened quietly, his bushy eyebrows drawing together. "It's been 6 years, Evelyn," he finally said. "Maybe it's time to tell Ethan the truth." I shook my head. Thomas wanted him to succeed on his own merits. And he has. Peter pointed out he's earned his position, but Thomas never intended for you to be disrespected this way. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a document, the quarterly report on Henderson Technologies. "The company's thriving. Your shares are worth more than 3.5 times what they were when Thomas passed. You could buy 12 mansions bigger than whatever house Amanda's showing off to her friends." I took the report, flipping through pages of figures that represented Thomas and my life's work. Nearly 30 years of sacrifice, risk, and determination. "Did I ever tell you about the beginning?" I asked softly. Before Henderson was even an idea, Peter settled back, giving me the time I needed. "We were so young when we met," I began. Thomas was working as a computer repairman. I was a receptionist at the same company. We lived in that tiny apartment on Oak Street, the one with the leaky ceiling and temperamental heating. I smiled at the memory. Thomas would bring broken computers home, fix them in our kitchen. I'd help him with the bookkeeping order parts. We saved every penny until we could afford to start the business. Those early years had been lean, but full of purpose. Thomas writing code late into the night while I managed the accounts, handled clients, made cold calls. Both of us terrified and exhilarated as we secured our first major contract. When I got pregnant with Ethan, we were scared we'd lose everything. I continued. I worked right up until my water broke. Was back answering phones with Ethan in a bassinet beside my desk 3 weeks later. Those memories were so vivid, nursing Ethan between client calls. Thomas taking him for walks when I needed to focus. Our baby growing up surrounded by the hum of computers and the vision of his parents building something meaningful. Ethan saw all of that. I said, but he was too young to remember. By the time he was in high school, the business was successful enough that we could give him a more normal life. Thomas wanted him to focus on being a teenager, not on the family business. When Ethan went to college, we made the decision not to tell him that his tuition was being paid by the company his parents had built. We sold our home and moved into a smaller house, using the difference to make it appear that's how we were financing his education. We wanted him to find his own path. I explained to Peter, not feel obligated to join the family business. The irony wasn't lost on me. Ethan had found his way to Henderson Technologies anyway, hired on his own merits, working his way up without ever knowing. Then Thomas got sick. Cancer fast and brutal. He made me promise, I whispered, my voice breaking in the hospital right before. He made me swear not to tell Ethan about the shares. He said our son needed to stand on his own feet, that the company would be his legacy, but Ethan's success needed to be his own. Peter reached over and patted my hand. Thomas was a good man, Evelyn, but he couldn't have foreseen this situation with Amanda. After Thomas's death, I'd transferred most of his shares into my name, maintaining our controlling interest in the company. A small portion went into a trust for Ethan that would mature when he turned 42, still 6 years away. As far as Ethan knew, his father had left him a modest inheritance, nothing more. Amanda met Ethan 4 years ago, I said. From the beginning, she made it clear she thought he could do better than his simple mother, always making little comments about my clothes, my house, suggesting I needed looking after. And Ethan allows this? Peter asked, his tone sharpening. I sighed. He's caught in the middle. Amanda's ambitious. She sees him as her ticket to the life she wants. A life you could provide with the snap of your fingers, Peter pointed out. I stared down at the photograph again. Young Thomas and Evelyn, full of dreams that had actually come true. I don't know what to do, Peter, I admitted. I've kept my promise, but at what cost? Peter closed his briefcase with a decisive click. I think it's time we reviewed your options, Evelyn. Legally, the company is yours to control as you see fit. As we began discussing possibilities, I felt something stirring within me. Not vengeance, but a quiet determination. Thomas had wanted to protect our son from entitlement. He never intended for me to become a doormat. It was time for some changes at Henderson Technologies. The following week, I decided to do something I hadn't done in years. Visit Henderson Technologies headquarters, not as the majority shareholder, but as Ethan's mother, bringing him lunch, as I occasionally did before Amanda came into our lives. The gleaming glass building downtown was a far cry from our first office. I signed in at reception, noting how the young woman eyed my modest clothing with barely concealed judgment. I'm here to see Ethan Henderson, I said. I'm his mother. She looked skeptical, but called up to his office. Minutes later, Ethan appeared surprised and something like discomfort on his face. Mom, what are you doing here? He glanced around nervously, as if worried someone important might see us. I brought your favorite, I said, holding up the bag containing his lunch. Chicken salad on sourdough. His face softened slightly. You didn't have to do that. He led me to a small break room instead of his office. I understood. He didn't want colleagues seeing his unfashionable mother in his workspace. As we sat, I noticed dark circles under his eyes. You look tired, sweetheart. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so like his father's it made my heart ache. Big project. Amanda's been stressed too. She's got her heart set on that house in Briarwood Estates, and we can't afford it unless I get this promotion. I knew Briarwood Estates, multi-million-dollar homes where executives and old money lived, far above Ethan's current salary. Even with Amanda's income from her part-time interior design work. That's quite ambitious, I said, carefully. Ethan sighed. Amanda says it's the right neighborhood for someone on my career track. She's already talking to designers. He smiled weakly. You know Amanda once she sets her mind on something. I certainly did know. After lunch, I asked to use the restroom. Instead, I took a detour wandering the halls of the company Thomas and I had built. I recognized a few old-timers who nodded politely, not knowing who I really was. The executive floor was quiet, most occupants at lunch. Amanda's voice drifted from a conference room door, slightly ajar. She wasn't supposed to be here today. Curious, I paused. Trust me, Brandon, it's a perfect arrangement. Amanda's tone was intimate in a way that made me uncomfortable. Ethan gets the promotion, you get the contract, and I make sure everyone's happy. A man's voice, low amused. And how exactly do you plan to convince the board they're notoriously conservative about the Asian expansion? Ethan has a presentation next week. I've helped him prepare it. Once he's VP of operations, he can push through your proposal easily. And what does your husband think about you meeting me like this? Amanda laughed. Ethan sees what I want him to see. He's so desperate for approval. It's almost too easy. I leaned against the wall, blood pounding in my ears. Was Amanda having an affair? Or was this some kind of business manipulation? There's still the matter of the unknown shareholder, the man, Brandon said. No one seems to know who controls those shares since old man Henderson died. Ethan says his father left everything to some trust. The shares will come to him eventually. Until then, we work with what we have. Speaking of which, there was silence, then sounds that confirmed my worst suspicions. I hurried away feeling sick. Back home, I called Peter immediately. He arrived within the hour, bringing along Laura Bennett, the former CFO of Henderson Technologies, who had retired last year but still served as my proxy on the board. Amanda's involved with someone named Brandon, I explained. They're plotting something involving an Asia expansion, and she mentioned Ethan's upcoming presentation to the board. Laura's expression darkened. That would be Brandon Cooper. Smooth Operator runs a consulting firm specializing in Asian markets. He's been pushing the board to invest millions in a risky venture. We've been resistant until now, Peter added grimly. If Ethan becomes VP of operations and advocates for it there, using my son, I said, the realization burning like acid. There's more. I continued explaining Amanda's comment about the unknown shareholder and Ethan eventually inheriting. Peter and Laura exchanged looks. Evelyn, Peter said gently, I think Amanda is planning for the long term. If she believes Ethan will inherit controlling interest, she's positioning herself. Laura finished setting up influence and connections for when that happens. My hands trembled. And Ethan, where does he fit in her plans? Neither answered, but their silence spoke volumes. There's something else, I admitted. Last night, I overheard a phone conversation. Amanda's been pressuring Ethan to have me move to Maple Grove Retirement Community. She says I'm becoming difficult to manage and it would be better for everyone. Peter's bushy eyebrows shot up. That's a rather expensive facility. Yes, I said. And apparently Ethan would need to sell my house to afford it. The house that was fully paid off. The house that, while modest, was worth considerable money in today's market. This is getting concerning, Evelyn, Laura said. Amanda appears to be manipulating both Ethan's career and your living situation. I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the garden Thomas and I had planted together. I made a promise to my husband, I said quietly. But I don't think he would want this. What do you want to do? Peter asked. I turned back to them. Decision made. I want to protect my son and the company we built, not by revealing everything right away. That might just drive Ethan further into Amanda's influence. A more subtle approach then, Laura suggested. I nodded. I'm going to attend the board meeting next week, not as Evelyn Henderson, but as Mr. Carter, the proxy shareholder. It's time I saw exactly what Amanda and this Brandon are planning. And if Ethan recognizes you? Peter asked. I smiled grimly. Amanda has made it very clear that no one expects to see Evelyn Henderson in a boardroom. Sometimes, invisibility has its advantages. As Peter and Laura left making arrangements for the meeting, I felt a calm determination settle over me. Amanda thought she was playing a clever game, using my son as a pawn in her ambitions. She had no idea she was playing against the woman who had built the board itself. The day of the board meeting arrived with a pounding rainstorm fitting for the turmoil I felt inside. I stared at my reflection in the bedroom mirror, barely recognizing myself. Gone was the simple Evelyn in practical clothes. Laura had taken me shopping for the occasion, insisting that Mr. Carter, mysterious major shareholder, would dress this part. I wore a charcoal gray suit with subtle pinstripes, crisp white blouse, and low heels that still felt foreign on my feet. My usually unstyled gray hair had been cut into a sleek bob and colored a rich chestnut brown close to my natural color before age had taken it. Laura's stylist had shown me how to apply makeup that enhanced my features without being obvious. "Perfect," Laura said, appearing behind me. "You look like exactly what you are, a powerful businesswoman who owns 5% of a successful tech company." I touched the delicate gold watch that had been Thomas's gift on our 25th anniversary. Thomas would hardly recognize me. Laura squeezed my shoulder. "He'd be proud. Evelyn, you're protecting everything you built together." The Henderson Technologies boardroom was on the top floor with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. I entered behind Laura, who had coached me thoroughly on how Mr. Carter would behave. Confident, reserved, observant. Heads turned as we entered. I recognized most of the board members from the reports Peter provided, though I'd only met a few in person over the years. Ethan sat near the middle of the table looking nervous. At the far end sat Amanda, who technically had no position at the company, but had apparently been invited for this special presentation. Beside her was a handsome man in his early 40s, Brandon Cooper, I presumed. "Ah," Laura said, "Gregory Shaw, the board chairman." "And this must be Mr. Carter," Laura supplied smoothly. "Here to observe today's proceedings." Murmurs circulated the room. The mysterious shareholder had sent proxies to meetings for years, but had never appeared in person. I nodded politely, but said nothing, taking a seat near the head of the table. Ethan was staring at me with a slight frown as if trying to place my face. I kept my expression neutral, though my heart pounded. Would he recognize his own mother? Beneath the tailored suit and new hairstyle, his gaze moved on. Amanda leaned over to whisper something to Brandon, both looking suspiciously at me. I opened the leather portfolio Laura had provided, acting absorbed in the meeting agenda. The meeting proceeded with routine business first. I spoke only when necessary, keeping my comments brief and direct, as Laura had advised. Ethan kept glancing at me, that puzzled look returning. Amanda was less subtle, openly studying me with narrowed eyes. Finally, Gregory announced, "Next item presentation on the proposed Asian market expansion by Ethan Henderson." Ethan stood, straightened his tie nervously, and moved to the front of the room. As he began his presentation, I could see Thomas in him. The same earnest intelligence, the careful way he explained complex concepts. But I also saw something Thomas never had: an undercurrent of desperation, a need to impress at all costs. His proposal involved opening offices in Hong Kong and Shenzhen, with a significant investment in speculative software development tailored to Asian markets. The numbers he projected were ambitious, bordering on fantasy. "As you can see," Ethan concluded, "our projected return on investment would be 29% within 16 months, with potential for exponential growth thereafter." I glanced around the table. Most board members looked skeptical. Brandon Cooper, however, was nodding enthusiastically. "Very impressive, Ethan," Brandon said. "If I may add, my consultancy has extensive connections in both markets. We could facilitate immediate entry points, significantly reducing typical startup costs." Amanda beamed at Ethan with manufactured pride. I felt ill watching her performance. Gregory looked unconvinced. "The investment required is substantial, and these projections seem conservative." "Actually," Brandon interjected smoothly, "my team has compiled extensive market research." I'd heard enough. I cleared my throat softly, and the room fell silent. All eyes turned to me. "Mr. Henderson," I said, addressing my own son. "Formally, your enthusiasm is commendable. However, I see several flaws in your proposal." I proceeded to ask pointed questions about his market analysis, risk assessment, and contingency planning. With each question, Ethan's confidence visibly deflated. Amanda's expression turned from confusion to anger. "Who exactly are you to question this proposal?" she finally interrupted. "Ethan has worked extremely hard on this presentation." "Amanda," Ethan muttered, embarrassed by her outburst. No, Ethan, she snapped. Some mysterious shareholder who never bothers to show up suddenly appears and starts undermining you. That's not right. I met her gaze steadily. Mrs. Henderson, I'm simply doing due diligence as a major investor in this company. Your husband's proposal risks millions of dollars on projections that appear to have been influenced by outside interests. I glanced meaningfully at Brandon. Brandon shifted uncomfortably. I kept my expression neutral, though my heart pounded. Would he recognize his own mother beneath the tailored suit and new hairstyle? His gaze moved on. Amanda leaned over to whisper something to Brandon, both looking suspiciously at me. I opened the leather portfolio Laura had provided, acting absorbed in the meeting agenda. The meeting proceeded with routine business first. I spoke only when necessary, keeping my comments brief and direct as Laura had advised. Ethan kept glancing at me, that puzzled look returning. Amanda was less subtle, openly studying me with narrowed eyes. Finally, Gregory announced, "Next item, presentation on the proposed Asian market expansion by Ethan Henderson." Ethan straightened his tie nervously, and moved to the front of the room. As he began his presentation, I could see Thomas in him. The same earnest intelligence, the careful way he explained complex concepts. But I also saw something Thomas never had: an undercurrent of desperation, a need to impress at all costs. His proposal involved opening offices in Hong Kong and Shenzhen, with a significant investment in speculative software development tailored to Asian markets. The numbers he projected were ambitious, bordering on fantasy. As you can see, Ethan concluded, our projected return on investment would be 29% within 16 months, with potential for exponential growth thereafter. I glanced around the table. Most board members looked skeptical. Brandon Cooper, however, was nodding enthusiastically. Very impressive, Ethan, Brandon said. If I may add, my consultancy has extensive connections in both markets. We could facilitate immediate entry points, significantly reducing typical startup costs. Amanda beamed at Ethan with manufactured pride. I felt ill watching her performance. Gregory looked unconvinced. The investment required is substantial, and these projections seem conservative. Actually, Brandon interjected smoothly, my team has compiled extensive market research. I'd heard enough. I cleared my throat softly, and the room fell silent. All eyes turned to me. Mr. Henderson, I said, addressing my own son. Formally, your enthusiasm is commendable. However, I see several flaws in your proposal. I proceeded to ask pointed questions about his market analysis, risk assessment, and contingency planning. With each question, Ethan's confidence visibly deflated. Amanda's expression turned from confusion to anger. Who exactly are you to question this proposal? She finally interrupted. Ethan has worked extremely hard on this presentation. Amanda? Ethan muttered, embarrassed by her outburst. No, Ethan, she snapped. Some mysterious shareholder who never bothers to show up suddenly appears and starts undermining you. That's not right. I met her gaze steadily. Mrs. Henderson, I'm simply doing due diligence as a major investor in this company. Your husband's proposal risks millions of dollars on projections that appear to have been influenced by outside interests. I glanced meaningfully at Brandon. Brandon shifted uncomfortably. How is that possible? I asked, my mind racing. I don't know, but Ethan called Laura this morning asking direct questions about your involvement. He sounded agitated. I set the coffee pot down with a shaking hand. I was going to tell him everything tonight. You may not have that luxury, Peter cautioned. Evelyn, if Amanda has convinced Ethan you've been deceiving him all these years. The doorbell rang, interrupting him. Someone's here. I'll call you back. Through the peephole, I saw Ethan standing on my porch, his expression stormy. I took a deep breath and opened the door. Ethan, I wasn't expecting you until... Were you ever going to tell me? He demanded, pushing past me into the hallway. Or was the plan to keep lying to me forever? I closed the door, my heart pounding. Ethan, please let me explain. Explain what? That you're actually Mr. Carter, that you've owned the company all this time, that my entire career has been. He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture so like his father's. What mother? A joke. Some kind of test. No, I said firmly. Never that. Please, sit down. Let me tell you everything. Reluctantly, he followed me to the living room, but remained standing arms crossed. How did you find out? I asked gently. Amanda, he said. She hired a private investigator after the board meeting. She thought there was something strange about this Carter person who appeared out of nowhere and tanked my proposal. I closed my eyes briefly. Of course she had. Is it true? Ethan demanded. Do you control Henderson Technologies? I looked my son in the eyes. Yes. Your father and I founded the company before you were born. When he died, I inherited his shares. I own 55% of Henderson. Ethan stared at me as if seeing a stranger. All these years you've been living here in this modest house, driving that old car while you were worth millions. I confirmed. Yes. Why? The word came out like an accusation. Why would you hide this? Why would you let me work there not knowing? Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? It was your father's wish, I said. He wanted you to succeed on your own merits, not because you were the owner's son. He believed it would make you stronger, more independent. And you, Ethan's voice cracked slightly. What did you want? The question pierced my heart. I wanted to honor your father's dying wish, but I also wanted to protect you. Ethan scoffed. Protect me. From what? Success, wealth, knowing my own heritage. From never knowing if you'd earned your position, I explained, willing him to understand. From the doubt that would have followed you if everyone knew you were the boss's son. He was silent for a long moment, processing. And the board meeting yesterday, what was that about? I chose my words carefully. I had concerns about the proposal. The projections seemed unrealistic, and I was worried about the involvement of Brandon Cooper. His eyes narrowed. What about Brandon? This was the delicate part, how much to reveal about Amanda without pushing Ethan further away. I have reason to believe his involvement may not be in the best interests of the company. Amanda says he's brilliant. Ethan's defensive tone told me everything about his state of mind. She says the board is too conservative, afraid of innovation. Ethan, I said gently, have you looked into Brandon's background, his track record with other companies? Uncertainty flickered across his face. Amanda did the research. I think you should do your own, I suggested, before tomorrow's board meeting. His jaw tightened. You know about that too. Yes, I admitted. And I need you to understand something important, Ethan. The restructuring Amanda is proposing would remove the very people who helped your father build this company, people who have protected its integrity for decades. Amanda says they're blocking progress. He countered, but with less conviction. I moved to my desk and pulled out a folder, the one Peter had prepared months ago when we first noticed Brandon Cooper circling the company. This contains information about Cooper's previous ventures, 3 companies that invested in his Asian expansion plans. All 3 suffered significant losses. 1 filed for bankruptcy. Ethan hesitated, then took the folder. Why should I believe anything you say now? You've been lying to me for years. The accusation stung, but I understood his pain. I haven't been completely honest about my role at Henderson Technologies. That's true, but I have never lied about loving you or wanting what's best for you. He looked away, blinking rapidly. Ethan, I said softly, think about how quickly Amanda found this information about me. Less than 24 hours after the meeting, she must have already been investigating. already suspicious. She was protecting me, he insisted, but doubt had crept into his voice. Was she? I asked. Or was she protecting her own interests? He stood abruptly. I need time to think to process all this. Of course, I said, rising too. But Ethan, please, before tomorrow's meeting, look at that folder and ask yourself why Amanda is pushing so hard for this restructuring. At the door, he paused. All those board meetings over the years? You were there, weren't you? As Mr. Carter's proxy. I nodded. I wanted to stay connected to what your father and I built, and to you. Something shifted in his expression. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a crack in his anger. The board meeting is at 9 tomorrow, he said. I suppose you'll be there. I will, I confirmed. As myself this time. No more proxies. After he left, I called Peter and Laura, updating them on the confrontation. We spent hours strategizing, calling loyal board members, preparing for every possible scenario Amanda might unleash. By evening, I was exhausted but resolved. Tomorrow would decide everything, not just the future of Henderson Technologies, but my relationship with my son. As I prepared for bed, my phone chimed with a text message from an unknown number. It contained a single photo: Ethan and Amanda having dinner with Brandon Cooper, all three looking grim and determined. Beneath the photo was a message. They're planning something bigger than a restructuring. Be prepared. I stared at the screen, wondering who my mysterious ally was. Then I recognized the restaurant in the background and the waitress partially visible at the edge of the frame. It was Kelly Thomas's niece, who had waited tables at that restaurant for years. She had recognized Ethan and Amanda and clearly found their conversation concerning enough to warn me. I sent back a simple thank you and set my phone aside, a plan forming in my mind. If Amanda wanted to play hardball, she'd find I was more than capable of stepping up to the plate. Tomorrow, Evelyn Henderson would finally take her rightful place at the head of the table. The Henderson Technologies boardroom fell silent as I walked in. No disguise today, just Evelyn Henderson in a simple but elegant navy suit. My silver hair neatly styled, Thomas's watch on my wrist. Board members who had known me for years, but only as Ethan's mother, or as Laura's mysterious client, stared in confusion. Amanda, seated beside Ethan near the head of the table, looked like she'd been slapped. Brandon Cooper, on Ethan's other side, leaned over to whisper something in his ear. "What is she doing here?" Amanda hissed loudly enough for everyone to hear. "This is a closed board meeting." Gregory Shaw, the chairman, looked equally confused. "Mrs. Henderson, I'm afraid." "It's quite all right, Gregory," I said calmly, placing my leather portfolio on the table. "I believe you'll find I have every right to be here." Peter Lawson entered behind me carrying his briefcase. "Mrs. Henderson is here in her capacity as majority shareholder of Henderson Technologies," he announced. "She holds 55% of the company shares." A collective gasp rippled through the room. All eyes turned to Ethan, who sat rigid, his expression unreadable. "This is ridiculous," Amanda sputtered. "Ethan's father owned the company. The shares are in a trust until Ethan turns 42, I finished for her. Yes, a small portion are, but the controlling interest passed to me upon Thomas's death. Gregory looked bewildered, but Laura has been voting those shares for years as my proxy, I confirmed, and as Mr. Carter when necessary. Another shockwave visibly passed through the room. Brandon Cooper's smooth composure finally cracked. "Mrs. Henderson has documentation confirming all of this," Peter added, pulling papers from his briefcase, "which I'll happily provide to each board member, but perhaps we should address the purpose of today's emergency meeting first." I took a seat directly across from Ethan, our eyes meeting briefly before he looked away. The hurt was still there, but something else to uncertainty. "Yes, let's proceed," Gregory agreed, gathering himself. "Ethan, you called this meeting to propose restructuring the executive team." Ethan cleared his throat. Actually, in light of recent information, I'd like to propose a different agenda. Amanda whipped her head around to stare at him. Ethan, we discussed this. Stick to the plan. A tense silence followed. Ethan looked down at the folder in front of him, the one I'd given him the day before, containing all the evidence about Brandon Cooper's failed ventures. I spent last night doing additional research, Ethan said slowly, about our company's history, about Cooper's business record, and about the Asian expansion proposal. He looked up, his gaze moving from Amanda to Brandon to me. I found some troubling inconsistencies. Ethan, Amanda warned, her voice tight. He ignored her. Brandon Cooper has been involved with 3 companies that attempted similar expansions into Asian markets. All 3 suffered significant losses. Brandon's smile turned cold. Markets involve risk, Ethan. Your father understood that. My father, Ethan repeated, emphasis on the word, built this company with careful growth strategies. He never gambled with his employees' livelihoods. I felt a surge of pride hearing Ethan defend Thomas's principles. Furthermore, Ethan continued, I discovered that the projections in my proposal were based on manipulated data. He turned to Amanda. Data you helped prepare. Amanda's face flushed. You're being ridiculous. I was helping you. Were you? Ethan challenged. Or were you helping Brandon secure a multi-million-dollar consulting contract? Brandon stood abruptly. I don't have to sit here and listen to these accusations. Actually, you do, I interjected, because the board should also know about your previous relationship with Atlantic Tech Partners, the company you recommended as our Asian manufacturing partner. I nodded to Peter, who distributed more documents. A company where you were previously a silent partner and still receive consulting fees. The board members murmured as they reviewed the evidence. This is a witch hunt, Brandon snapped. Ethan stood slowly. No, it's due diligence, something I should have done before bringing this proposal forward. He faced the board. I withdraw my proposal for Asian expansion and recommend we sever all ties with Cooper Consulting. Ethan, Amanda began. Amanda grabbed his arm. You're ruining everything. He pulled away from her. No, Amanda, I'm stopping us from making a terrible mistake. He turned to face her fully. Just like I'm stopping us from making a terrible mistake about my mother. Amanda's expression turned venomous. Your pathetic mother has been lying to you for years. She's been controlling your career, manipulating everything from the shadows. My mother, Ethan said quietly, has been honoring my father's wishes while protecting the company they built together. He looked at me, then his eyes softening, something he was only beginning to understand. Gregory cleared his throat. In light of these revelations, I believe we should adjourn to consider next steps. As the board members filed out, Amanda remained seated, her face a mask of fury. You've ruined everything, she hissed at me. We had it all planned. The promotion, the house, everything. You had it planned, Ethan corrected her, using me as your stepping stone. Don't be naive, Ethan, she snapped. Everyone uses everyone. Your precious mother used you too, keeping you in the dark while she controlled everything. There's a difference, he replied. She did it out of love. You did it out of greed. Amanda grabbed her purse and stood. This isn't over, she threatened, glaring at both of us before storming out, Brandon trailing behind her. Finally, Ethan and I were alone in the boardroom. I'm still angry with you, he said after a long silence. You should have told me the truth years ago. I know, I admitted. Keeping your father's promise became a habit, then a shield. I was afraid if I told you I'd lose you. Instead, you almost lost me to Amanda's manipulations. He shook his head. When did you know about her and Brandon? I suspected at the company party. I said, then confirmed it when I overheard them at the office. He nodded slowly. Last night after I left your house, I called some former colleagues who had worked with Brandon. Everything you said was true. His voice caught. And then I started wondering what else you were right about. Amanda? I asked gently. I checked her phone while she was in the shower, he admitted. The texts between her and Brandon. They've been planning this for months, using me as their ticket into the company. He looked up, his eyes shining with unshed tears. Was I that blind, Mom? The word Mom, so simple, so powerful, broke something open inside me. We see what we want to see in the people we love, I said softly. I've made my own mistakes. Ethan came around the table and took the seat beside me. What happens now with the company? With us? I reached for his hand. That's up to you. Your father wanted you to make your own way, and you have. You're a good businessman, Ethan, with or without the Henderson name behind you. And Amanda? I squeezed his hand. Also your decision. But speaking as both your mother and the majority shareholder of this company, I'd recommend some serious reconsideration of that relationship. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Already ahead of you. I packed a bag this morning. 2 months later, I sat in the same boardroom, watching with pride as Ethan presented a new proposal, a carefully researched plan for expanding our educational software division. Amanda was gone from his life, though the divorce proceedings were just beginning. Brandon Cooper had disappeared, moving on to other potential marks. Ethan had moved into the guest house on my property temporarily, he said, though we both knew he was healing from more than just a failed marriage. He was reconnecting with his roots, with the legacy his father and I had built. And so, Ethan concluded his presentation. I believe this expansion stays true to Henderson's core values while positioning us for sustainable growth. Thank you, Ethan, I said from my place at the head of the table, a position I had finally publicly claimed. The board will vote now. The proposal passed unanimously. As the meeting adjourned, Gregory approached me. Evelyn, I've been meaning to tell you, Thomas would be proud of how you've handled everything. I smiled, touching the watch on my wrist. I think he would be prouder of Ethan for finding his own way just as Thomas wanted. Later that evening, Ethan and I sat on the back porch of my home, our home, watching the sunset much as Thomas and I had done for so many years. Mom, he said thoughtfully, I've been thinking about the company name. Oh. I took a sip of my tea. Everyone associates Henderson with Dad, but you are always there too. Maybe it's time for a small change. Nothing dramatic, just acknowledging the full story. What did you have in mind? I asked. Henderson and Carter Technologies. He suggested honoring both legacies. I felt tears prick my eyes. Your father would like that. And the mysterious Mr. Carter? Ethan asked with a small smile. Will she make any more appearances? I laughed softly. I don't think so. Evelyn Henderson is finally ready to step into the light. As the last rays of sun gilded the garden Thomas and I had planted, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. Amanda had called me a leech, never knowing that I was actually the foundation of everything she coveted. Now the truth was out, and with it came not the revenge I might have sought, but something far more valuable: redemption, reconnection, and the chance to finally honor both Thomas's legacy and my own. Sometimes I reflected, the greatest power comes not from hiding in the shadows, but from finally stepping forward to claim your rightful place in the sun.